Hi guys, so welcome to my presentation on the Babylonian prophecy, Babylon. I did hint I was going to talk about this in my last study live. I'm doing this differently, obviously it's not a live this time, and I hope to successfully upload this on Facebook and YouTube and other social media platforms. And please bear with me because I am trying to get used to this technology that allows me to record myself and the screen at the same time, so it's a little finicky. Hopefully everything works well during the presentation. I already did my prayer because I actually attempted to do this video just a minute ago and it just basically stopped recording. So I already did my opening prayer, so I just want to get started here. So the topic obviously is about Babylon. Who is Babylon and who is the bride in Revelation? This is focusing on Revelation. Part 1 is analysis in the biblical aspect of Babylon and all of that, with a little bit of some historic connections, but in part 2 is where I'm focusing more on historically on the agenda of Babylon and historically, like these certain movements and religions that are inspired by Babylon and where the Bible identifies as the root of these teachings is Babylon. So hope you enjoy this study, and I'm going to make a part 1 and a part 2 of this. So Revelation 17 is where it talks about or introduces this character named Babylon. And originally in the Old Testament, Babylon was a nation. It was the enemy nations of God, of Israel, and basically took captive Israel and conquered it and basically destroyed a lot of the people there and took some captives, and it resulted, it was like a whole war that basically went between Israel and Babylon. Babylon won. But we're also going to get into the origin of Babylon because it's more than just a nation. There's a spirit behind it. There's an origin before before it became like a prominent nation. And we're going to talk about that. So in Revelation 17, verse 1 and 3 to 5, it talks about how she sits on the scarlet beast. And in my last studies, we talked about the scarlet beast being the Roman papacy. This beast that had like 10 horns, but 3 of them were removed. So now it has 7. So it's a 7-headed beast, and that the heads meant basically like the powers or leaders and the powers of Rome, and that there was one unique head that had a little horn that was the papacy, and it was revealing that it was different. It was unique because it was a Christian government ruled by Rome, and Rome was originally pagan. And writing is just another way I see it as basically guiding the beast. Like someone rides a horse or an animal, they're normally the ones in charge. So here it's revealing that the church is actually, or this woman is actually in charge of the beast, of the papacy. So what is this harlot or prostitute? Basically what they're symbolizing here. What does this mean? Why is she controlling the beast? Why is it saying that she's controlling the papacy? So that's what we're going to analyze here. And remember, this is the same beast that has the name blasphemy written on it. It blasphemes God. So we know the papacy has done that in the past videos from the quotes that they have said, how they view the Pope's title and position. All of that, the origins of all of that is blasphemous. Babylon has purple and scarlet. It has a golden cup of abominations. So she's dressed in purple and scarlet. She's all decked out in jewelry. And she has a golden cup of abominations. It says abominations on it. And she has a name written on her forehead, and it says, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So very interesting title here and characteristics. So that's what we're going to analyze here. So, okay. So, first, though, before we get started on her, let's see the characteristic of the bride, because before you get to Revelation 17, there is another woman who's an important character in this whole entire climax of the Bible, the story of Revelation, who is described in the opposite of Babylon. Her description is very different. And so here's what it says. And this is Revelation 12. So it describes her as pure. She's pure. She has clothing that represents purity. It's white or linen, which was used for the priests, the Levites and everything. They were to wear linen, they were white. That's also representative of how the angels dressed. You can find that in Ezekiel, how they describe the angels being dressed in linen or white. And that usually represents purity in the Bible. And she has the sun and moon. So she's basically standing on the sun and moon. She has a crown of stars. They're like 12 stars. And the 12 stars actually represent the 12, not only the 12 tribes, but also the 12 apostles. So this represents the apostles, the 12 tribes, all of them combined there. And she symbolizes a woman. She symbolizes a bride. You can find this in the Old Testament. It talks about Zion. And here's a verse here on the screen where in Jeremiah 6:2, it says, I have likened the daughter of Zion to a lovely and delicate woman. So this is actually not talking literally of a woman, but talking about God's people, Israel at the time. God has made his own people, his own community that were to be a representative of him, right? They were to be pure, and they were to be, that's why they had all these guidelines on how they were to dress, what they were to eat, all of these things, because they were to be pure. They represent purity from the worldliness of the ancient civilizations at the time and what they were practicing. So Zion is the name, and it's always described as a bride, a woman that's waiting for her husband, or the bridegroom, right? Or even says many things of like husband, or and that's normally representing Jesus. So that is what a woman is. A woman is the church, is God's people. God's people represents a woman, and Christ represents the bridegroom, the husband. And so that is what the symbolism means for a woman in the Bible. And so this is what Zion is. So we go to then Revelation. We're given the same description here, where it says in Revelation 19, verse 7 and 8, it says, and to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen. So this is dressed in linen again, purity, clean and bright. For the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. So here it's telling you in Revelation that the garment that this woman is wearing is actually, this woman is actually representing the righteous acts of the saints. So this is the saints, the church, the chosen people of God. This is what it's representing. A pure church is the bride. Now, if a woman or bride here means God's people or church, according to Revelation, in other passages, this must mean that Babylon is the exact opposite. So it means that basically the church has gone apostate. And you can find this in these descriptions in Ezekiel, for example, on the screen, chapter 16, 2 and 15. You see that it says, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations. You trusted in your own beauty, played the harlot. So see those correlations here. It's talking about Jerusalem, and then it says her abominations. So talking about the community as a whole. And then it's referring to this community as a whole as a her, and it's saying abominations, and then the key word says harlot, played the harlot. So it's accusing the community, the church, Israel at the time, to play harlotry. And harlotry, we know, was sexual immorality when it came to an individual sense. But in a spiritual sense, and when it's talking about a church committing harlotry, is really talking about idolatry. So we'll explain this here. So this is normally to describe God's people in rebellion. Idolatry in the Bible is often compared to adultery. And this is one of the reasons why God takes adultery very seriously, especially in Israel, where it is punishable by death. This is because marriage between a man and a woman is sacred and is often compared to Christ's relationship to his church, the bride. Christ is called the bridegroom, the church is called the bride. And this is to represent the true and faithful church, just like a wife or a bride was expected to remain faithful before the wedding day to her the engaged person, the person she's engaged to, is the same way that we as Christians are to be pure in our ways till the wedding day. And the wedding day is the reuniting with Jesus, with his church, the second coming. And so that soon marriage to come is the second coming of Jesus. And therefore a woman, it was expected to be pure. Same for the bridegroom. He was expected to be pure as well. But this is mostly focusing on the woman, because we know that Christ remained pure. He remained pure to the end. So now it's our responsibility as his church, his people. He expects us now to be purified and remain that way, in that state. So the church that embraces idolatry, though, is the opposite. It became unfaithful, and embraces sinfulness. That means that it became unfaithful. That is what it means to be apostate, has gone the opposite direction. A church who has basically gone AWOL. With a bridegroom, the marriage may be halted and neglected when the bride does this before marriage. So, of course, if a bridegroom is anticipating that his bride is going to remain faithful until the actual wedding day, and she goes and starts to fornicate with other men and basically commit adultery, then what is that bridegroom going to do? That bridegroom may not continue the marriage. He may break off the engagement because this woman has proved to be unfaithful. So why would he want to marry her, and knowing that her characteristics are unfaithful? So this is the same exact way that Christ is comparing this to the church. He's comparing this as basically a church, the people of God, becoming unfaithful to him and committing idolatry or allowing certain things into the church that are against his wishes, and basically going the opposite direction, that it's like, well, Jesus, the bridegroom, is not going to sit around and wait for this bride, this church, to get it together. If they can't prove themselves before the marriage, why would he want to marry them after they've already proven themselves before the marriage? So this is the issue that we're seeing. This is the controversy that we're seeing here. So the bride is to remain pure to the end. That is his church. And the issue with Israel, the church was accused of adultery because they chose to worship Baal rather than being faithful to God and not worshiping idols. They were committing fornication, you could say, or adultery with the other nations. They were worshiping other nations' gods, and they were following them and basically stripping themselves from purity, instead becoming impure. And so God forgave them many times when they wanted him back. So God was almost like that. You could see God as almost that bridegroom, right? That the Lord as that bridegroom, that when he saw that his bride that he was engaged to was asking for forgiveness and saying, forgive me, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to cheat on you or mess around and stuff. I'm going to prove to be faithful to you. He's like that bridegroom that just kept accepting her back. Like, okay, let's continue on and prepare for the wedding, But obviously, after so long, eventually that's going to stop. Eventually you are just saying that just so that you don't lose out on the wedding. But you don't really sincerely believe that, because you keep doing it over and over again. The bride doesn't believe that at all. And so the bridegroom then, who is Jesus, is convinced that she is no longer interested in him in reality. She just wants to be married to him for her own personal reasons. So this is the same concept. I want you guys to see it as the same concept. And that is why eventually the Lord looked for another bride. And that bride, a bride that would be faithful, and not because of works. So a church that would be faithful not because of works, but in case anyone would boast about it, but a church that would remain faithful because of love, because they loved him, they understood him. So that is where the Christian church came in when Christ arrived on the scene. That is the new church. That is the new people, chosen people of God. So as you can see here, idolatry equals adultery and harlotry. It's all the same thing in the language of spiritually speaking. So that is the difference between a harlot and a pure, undefiled church. One who has not gone with another man, but faithful until wedding day. This is how we as Christians are expected to be before his coming. So especially the last day church. The last day church are expected to be pure, undefiled, and focusing on Jesus and not committing idolatry by worshiping other gods or following the acts of the worldly and basically following after them and living like them. Instead, we are called to live differently and think differently than them. So that is the mission, that is the test of the church in the end times. So here is another example of the word usage of bride and bridegroom. So Jesus gives a parable in Matthew 25. He gives various parables concerning his coming and just like how Christians should be, all that kind of stuff. And in this parable, he uses the exact language of a wedding, and he is considered the bridegroom. And here you can see in verse 6, it says, "And at the midnight cry, there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom comes. You go out to meet him," or go out to meet him. So again, it's connecting Jesus to being the bridegroom. And in the parable, the bridesmaids were expected to all gather together for the wedding, and they were to await the bridegroom's call when he was ready, when the wedding was ready, and they were to make sure they were to have their lamps trimmed so they can travel, because this was at midnight, so that they could travel to meet the bridegroom. But there were some of the bridesmaids that did not prepare, and they didn't bring enough oil for their lamps so that their lamps could keep burning. And so they went and asked others for extra, and they didn't have extra. They said, we only have sufficient for ourselves. So while the midnight cry was heard and all was ready for the wedding, and the rest went to go meet the bridegroom, the others that didn't have enough oil, didn't prepare, they had to go and buy some. So that took their time from going to meet the bridegroom. Now they have to go buy oil. So by the time they came back to go get the oil, the door was shut and the wedding done already started, and it was too late, and the bridegroom did not let them in. And so this is this analogy of how it will be in the last day, with the last day church and the churches preparing for Jesus coming, that there's going to be some, these are individuals, so these bridesmaids were individuals. So there's going to be some individuals in the church that are going to be prepared for Jesus coming. They're going to make sure they have enough oil in their lamp. And remember, the lamp or light meant the gospel, and I think oil symbolized the Holy Spirit. So these people had the gospel in their hands, and they had their Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit rejuvenating the gospel in them. And so that is what the oil symbolizes, the Spirit or the Holy Spirit. Meanwhile, the others who were prepared, did have the light, did have oil at the time, they didn't prepare for extra, just in case they would run out. They didn't prepare for extra. So because they didn't prepare, they had to then take a detour and go search for more oil. And searching for more oil is analogy for searching for the Spirit, like trying to prepare now themselves. Now that the wedding done already started, the door was shut and the wedding's about to start. Now they're trying to prepare now when the wedding's about to start, and that's too late. And that door closing is a symbolism of probation closing. And it's the same analogy that you see in the story of Noah, when the ark closed and they were not allowed to go in, and the rain and the water didn't even start yet. But the door shut because God gave them enough time, and they decided not to come in. So they couldn't come in at the last minute because the door was shut. And it's the same way with probation. That's how it explains, before Jesus comes, the door is going to shut. Before he even comes, the door is going to shut. So that's important to know. And so this is the connection here of the bride is the church, and the bridesmaids in this parable was the people of God. The people of God were the bridesmaids that were assisting the bride in the wedding. So this is what this means. And it's important for us to understand that, because this helps us understand better how we are expected then to behave, all of us together as a church for Jesus coming. So now, identifying the harlot church Babylon. So she is very different. She sits on a beast. She's riding the beast, controlling the nation. This beast, again, was very similar to the beast in Revelation 13, the seven-headed beast. It is the beast, actually. And in Daniel, in the four-beast prophecy. So Revelation 17 reveals that there is actually a woman controlling this beast, which is the papal power, the papacy. And so remember, now we understand that a woman in Bible prophecy means a church. So now we know that this church is controlling the beast. But because the word harlot is attached to it, that means that this church has actually been kind committing idolatry and sinfulness in the church. That it has been basically ingrained in the church itself now. So now it's become apostate or harlot. And it's controlling the beast, meaning that the church is controlling the Roman papacy. Well, what church is controlling the Roman papal government, the civil side of the Roman government? It's the Roman Catholic Church. That's what it must mean. And so it has a name written on the forehead, and it says, Babylon, mother of harlots. And remember, the mind or the forehead is a symbolism of the mind, and it normally refers to belief, allegiance, worship, because that's where it happens, is in the mind. And a mother is a word that needs to be emphasized here. Mother of all harlots. Why the word mother? And so there is a church that claims to be mother church, and that is the Roman Catholic Church. So we know that if it's writing and controlling the Roman papacy, the Roman papal government, then it must be the Roman Church itself, the Roman Catholic Church. And that's what we find. It actually claims to be mother, and you will see here in the next slide. So a prominent Catholic priest, John A. O'Brien, he said this about the church, Roman Catholic Church. He says that the observance, talking about Sunday keeping, remains as a reminder of the mother church from which the non-Catholic sects broke away. This is not the only quote that they have of referring to the Roman Catholic Church as the mother church. You can find this in a lot of their quotes. They constantly always refer to the mother church. And if you see in this picture, this is a depiction of Mary, actually, and she's considered a divine mother, the mother of the church, and she's covering or shielding her people. So this is basically what it's referring to. And so that is what the Roman Catholic Church claims to be, is the mother of the Christian church. And you'll find this in a lot of quotes. You can search on Google and stuff. So we know now who's controlling the beast, and that is the mother church herself. And so Revelation 13 also noticed that they were dealing with the nation of Rome. But now Revelation 17 is dealing with the spiritual side, the church side. So remember in Revelation 13, it was like the United States was involved. You see like the United States as the beast. That was church, and that was a Christian nation, or appeared to be Christian nation. And then also the dragon basically working behind these two powers, and then you have the Roman papacy. So this is all talking about nations and how they rise and all this kind of stuff. But Revelation 17 now is about the spiritual side, the church, the not just the Catholic Church, but also other religions it's going to dive into. This is a religious side now, and it's revealing. That's what Revelation is called, Revelation, to reveal. It's revealing that this whole controversy with these nations rising and falling is actually a religious issue. It's basically the religion itself is controlling these issues. So that's basically what the Roman Church says, that they are the mother church. Now, Revelation 17:6 says, "And I saw a woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement." So this woman riding the beast, who we find is the Roman Catholic Church, she's drunk with the blood of the saints. And we see here it's saying that it's the martyrs of Jesus. Being drunk with the blood of saints also means being overtaken with power over God's people that led to their death and persecution. As you see on the screen, there is some depictions of the persecutions, of just some of the persecutions that the church was involved in the Dark Ages. And also to remember, the church is responsible for a long period of dark persecution that lasted about 1260 years based off of prophecy, the prophetic standpoint, which is when the Roman papacy came into power and ruled along with the church side, which was in 538 AD. And this ended in 1798. The martyrs were those who died for faithfulness in the word of God despite persecution. These people died no matter what. They weren't following or bowing the knee to Catholicism, but to Christ. And because of that, that caused issues with them in the church, and they were persecuted, many of them. Some example of these were Waldensians, which is on the picture up here above. John Huss, which is below, and Protestant reformers, along with African churches, like the church in Ethiopia. All those were all in danger of persecution that were not following Catholic rule or order. And they went their own path, and because of that, they were persecuted. Revelation 17:6 also gives more clues of the church and how we can compare the two. It says that the church, or the woman, was arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Now that's tough at the end. It's talking about this just full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication, just talking about why she is called the harlot, because she's full of fornication. And as you can see in the pictures above, you can compare this to the dress, the traditional dress of the Pope and the cardinals, the bishops, how they dress. This has been a long tradition. This is almost is basically Revelation identifying and having us compare this church to see. So now we see another check mark here for comparisons. And so the tradition of the Pope wears royal colors of purple in special occasions, like very traditional ceremonies, because this is a traditional thing. And the cardinals were to wear red often. So purple and red is definitely something seen within the higher order of the Catholic Church, with the priest, the cardinals, and the Pope. They would wear these things during ceremonies. And during the Holy Feast, communion, the Pope and the bishops would also be seen holding a golden cup with wine representing Christ's blood. And remember, they believe in the literal practice of the atonement. When during the ceremony of the Eucharist, they actually believe that they transform the blood into literal blood of Jesus and the bread into the literal body of Christ. And so you're sacrificing Jesus every time you're doing the ceremony. So that's what they actually believe if you look into their catechism. So as you can see the golden cup in Pope Francis' hands, and you can find many pictures of this where they have a golden cup. And it's funny, it's just that's been a traditional thing for them. And the Bible is saying that this is what they do. They're arrayed in all of these things, in a golden cup in their hands full of abominations. The precious stones and pearls part now. And I connect this to the expensiveness of the church. If you see the Roman Catholic cathedrals, that's probably like one of the most attractive things of the church that many come to even visit Rome, is to see these cathedrals, because they're magnificent, they're beautiful. I mean, they're expensively built and put with all these materials of just precious things, even in their traditional, the items that they use for traditional ceremonies and stuff. All of that is actually real gold. It's expensive, and they actually, I looked it up too, like they are worth, like the Vatican, as far as like money wise, they are like very up there in the money, in the whole financial aspect of things. Like they're worth a lot, and they control a lot too. A lot of people don't know that. So that just goes into the characteristics of this Babylon in verse 6 about these expensive stuff that they have in their churches. Everything, it's very high quality stuff that they do for their church. So this is just proving again that the Bible is matching Babylon to the Roman Catholic Church. Also, the beast is guilty of blasphemy. That makes a church head, the Pope, blasphemous, right? And here you can find a quote where this is in The Rise of the Medieval Church. It says, ruled over the kings of the earth. Alexander Fick says that the 13th century Pope was, at least in theory, the ruler of the whole world in temporal and spiritual affairs. So that is also blasphemous, because Jesus is the ruler of the spiritual affairs and the temporal, both heaven and earth. Jesus was the ruler. He's the ruler. He's called Prince. He's called Prince of Peace. He's called a lot of different things, signifying that he is the ruler. But again, the Pope is taking the position of Jesus, that he is ruler of heaven and earth instead of Jesus, or that he is alongside Jesus, which is both still blasphemous. Next, it says that this woman ruled over the kings of the earth. So this is in connection to the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church is in bed with a lot of leaders in other countries and bankers and all these things. Is a very deep where their connections lie. And so this connects again with the prophecy of how this Babylon would be ruler or rule with the kings of the earth. She ruled the kings of the earth. The church was the true power behind the European monarchy, and they would remove anyone in a heartbeat that threatened their authority in the ancient times as well. And this, I still believe, is still prevalent today, but it's very hidden, very secret. But I do believe that the same power that they had back in the day is the same power that they're gaining now with the elites of the world. So you can look that up. You can find a lot of research and find a lot of connections between the Vatican and many of the elite and the rich of the world. So again, talking about the precious stones and jewels, I just wanted to give more of an example of just the extravagance of a lot of their stuff in the church. You see their cathedrals, buildings, even in the inside, everything is very just adorned. It's adornment. Everything is very extravagant. Even the hat of the Pope, and from head to toe. So this is what makes Babylon very attractive, because in the description of, especially with a harlot in the Old Testament, they described a harlot. A harlot would normally be dressed in very extravagant jewelry, and very out there to get the attention of other men so that men could sleep with her. That's normally what the harlot would do, a prostitute in the ancient times. And so that is what it's basically connecting to, is this church appears this way, of very attractive, so that people can flock to her and be attracted to her, and that therefore she commits idolatry and all these other things, and mixing with other churches or other denominations or whatever that are actually impure or contrary to them. And so you'll see all of this later. So next is, why is she given the title Babylon? Why is Roman Catholic Church given that name in the first place? What is the meaning behind the word Babylon? So first we must understand, obviously, the origin of Babylon. We know that it was a nation of ancient past that is long gone, one of the greatest ancient nations. So why is this kingdom, though, mentioned in the end times? I mean, because Revelation is dealing mostly with the beginning of the Christian church all the way to the end times, and then after Jesus comes. So why is this church mentioned any of this time when they have been long gone, way before the rise of the Christian church? Well, reminder that this is written on the forehead of the woman, which means beliefs and worship. So this church then has, it must mean that the Babylon is more of a idea or belief in this woman, in this church. So in Genesis, it gives us the first mention of a city named Babel that was named after the people, after people attempted to build a tower or temple to reach the heavenly skies. So here it is here. This is found in Genesis 11 in verse 4, 6, 7, and 9. You can read the whole thing. But here it says, this is what they say. They said, "Let us build a tower whose top is in the heavens." And the Lord said, "Let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." Therefore, its name is called Babel, confusion, because there the Lord confused the languages. So the root word for Babel is confusion. The purpose that they had was for a pagan idol. They were to build a tower for their own gods, to reach so high that the true God would never flood the earth, so that they could survive. Because remember, this happened after the whole flood story of Noah, and then how his sons and him, they basically populated the earth. They were told to be fruitful and multiply, and they started populating the earth with their wives, and they all kind of started going their own separate ways. They were told to go their own separate ways and to be fruitful around the earth. But there were some that wanted to stay all together, and they were pushing for a unity, for them to all stay together and work on this tower instead of obeying God's commands. So instead of trusting in the promise of Noah, that God would never flood the earth again, and that's what the rainbow was symbolized for, they trusted instead in their own skills. They did not trust the word of God, but instead they trusted in their own power and their own skills to ensure that a worldwide flood would never happen again. And so they exalted themselves to reach even the heavenly kingdom, becoming one themselves. So they, as you can see, this picture is an example of a ziggurat, and these were popular in the ancient time before the pyramid. This is where the pyramid idea came from, was from the ziggurats. And so if you can kind of see how they look like the pyramids, you can see where the Egyptians got the pyramid idea from, because it's shaped the same way. And so the very top part was said to be where the temple was, the most sacred temple was, and their idols would be in there, and the priests would be in the very high top working in the temple, and the priests were considered leaders at the time as well. So this was the most sacred part, was the top of the tower. So when they're reaching and building higher to the top, it was to show basically how they dominated others, and it was to make others envious of them. Other nations or sects that went off to be envious of them, to show that they had power. And so they were trying to build this all the way up to the very high skies to show how much power they had, and to prevent, again, a worldwide flood. Because also in the flood of Noah, many of them fled to the mountains and the hills, and when went up there to hide the catastrophe, but eventually it got them too. So it's like them trying to build their own mountain where they could escape a possible flood. So the Lord had to go down there and confuse their languages because they had a goal in mind. So here, Genesis 11, verse 6, the Lord then says, indeed, the people are one. They all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be upheld from them. Now, these are important. That's why I highlighted bolded some of these words here, because this is based on what we're about to talk about. So, the people are one. Does that sound familiar? A one world order is what you could see here happening, is a one world unification, because at the time too, everybody spoke one language. There was yet no other languages yet. It was just one language, and everybody was in one area, because remember, Noah and his family were the only ones that survived the flood, and then of course they probably stayed together until then when they started populating and having more children, and God then said, go and scatter the earth, be fruitful and multiply. But instead, they were the descendants of them later on were trying to stay all together and not listen. And so these people tried to gather as many people as they could to this project. This is what it is. Babel was the first civilization that attempted to create a one world government, one world order, with the temple as its head, with the priest of the temple at the head, elevated to the likeness of God. You see, in those times, leaders and rulers were also high priests. So now you see that the rulers of the ancient times in this time frame were high priests. And so the high priest was to be the head of the temple, and the temple was the main focus, the main place for this one world government. This would be the main focal point. And so this is very parallel to what it's talking about of Babylon being the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church also has a priest at its head, a high priest, that is the ruler of the church, the ruler of the government. So this is a parallel that you see happening. So is the Bible cluing that the Roman Church attempts to do the same by calling her Babylon? That's the ultimate question. Didn't this power once rule majority of the world and almost took hold of the Americas until the Protestant Reformation halted their success? Then confusion was brought about that separated the people. So history has been repeating, as you can see. And aren't we told in the future they will almost be successful this time in this one world power, one world government order? Later on, there existed a very powerful nation that took on the name of the old ancient kingdom of Babel by the new name Babylon. This power overtook God's people when God withdrew protection from them because of them being in apostasy, talking about Israel. And they were defeated while the faithful were taken captive. Satan is said to be behind this power, Babylon, to destroy God's people. That is the purpose of that. So is Satan behind this new church named Babylon too, to destroy God's people? So you kind of have to see these connections here. There is the old Babylon was used by Satan to take over God's people and hopefully force them into committing sin with these people and being overcome by these people, right? So that was the whole purpose of Satan using Babylon. And Babylon was the main enemy of Israel. So it's the same thing that in the future, in the end times, Babylon is also again going to be an enemy of God's people. It's going to be another power used by Satan to persecute God's people, to take them captive and all of that. And so that's where the Roman church came in. The Roman church came in and infiltrated the church and then persecuted many of those that did not follow their Catholicism, and also attempted to control the whole world, but was stopped. But it says that this power would continue their mission that they were basically stopped from in the past, to control the whole world, and eventually it's going to lead to a persecution again of God's faithful people. So Babylon in the New Testament is a symbol then for a pagan religious system that's used as an enemy of God's people in end time church. And if you look into the etymology of Babylon, or they call it Babylim in secular sources, it means the gate of the gods. That is the pagan gods, the gate of Satan and his demons. And that is very interesting that that's what it means, because in later Babylon, like the Babylonian nation, there's a famous artifact where they have the gate of Ishtar, and that is one of the moon gods of Babylon. And that is like one of their like main, if you go to like the sites to look up like history, the archaeological evidences and stuff of Babylon, they have the gate of Ishtar. That was like probably, I think, the only remaining piece of the great temple or kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. Is one of like the greatest, like the biggest ones, and it's called the gate of Ishtar. So I found that kind of interesting, because Babylon means the gate of the gods, and then you have the gate of Ishtar as the entrance into Babylon. So this is just telling you that even the name itself is rooted in paganism. This is a paganistic church then, Babylon, referring to the Roman Catholic Church, that its concepts that they teach are of paganism. It's opening a gate for the devil and his demons. And so we're going to see why, because people may say, well, what? How does that make sense? Because the Roman Catholic Church isn't that a Christian church? Aren't they, very, they follow the Bible and stuff like that? At the end of the day, like, how will they be a pagan religion? So I can understand people may be questioning that, but when we get to analyze further, then things are going to make sense why that's the case. But let's first look into the belief systems of these ancient religions like Babylon and Sumerian. Let's see what they actually believed, and since they're basically the oldest of religions, ancient religions, let's look into how they may have influenced not only the Roman Catholic Church, but also other religions too. And that's the whole purpose of this study. So, as you can see, I have Sumerian and Babylonian beliefs. Sumer was the original Babylon. It was the ancient, the oldest one, and then it's Babylon. So that's how they differentiate in historical studies. You will say like Sumerian or ancient Mesopotamia is another word they call it, religions, and then there's Babylon, which is mostly focused on like the later kings in the later empire of Babylon. So here are things that they taught, they brought into other belief systems that came after them, because they were the original, and I truly believe that they're original because I believe the Bible. So they were the originators. They introduced astronomy and philosophy, the study of the stars, because remember they believed in star worship and the gods as in the heavens as stars and stuff and planets. They brought in the zodiac, believe in divination, which the priests and scribes participated in. They adopted a lot from the Sumerians. They had Marduk, head god. He was the head god in later Babylon Empire, but in the ancient earlier times, it was Enlil. He was the head god. They took ritual care of their idols. They believed in theocracy, which means their gods as the ruler of the nations, and the priests were rulers. So priests and the gods were rulers of the nation. So the priests acted as basically the king. They made, and that sounds very familiar, right, to Roman Catholicism, because they also had the same thing where their priest, their high priest, is the ruler. He's the head of the nation. And so this is what theocracy is. The priest was also a mediator between heaven and earth. So you can see where this concept came from. The underworld core or Kur was where the goddess of death ruled. And there's a depiction of the god of death with horns, which can basically explain the beliefs, the depictions of the devil with horns that later on was adopted by Catholicism, of course, and then spread into regular Christianity, because Catholicism was like the trendsetter of these pagan ideas into Christianity. So remember that. So the god of death had horns. He was the ruler of the underworld. So they brought up that concept of the underworld. The afterlife depended on the burial method of someone. Polytheism originated here, and they influenced future or later polytheistic religions and paganism. So these are what they brought in that influenced a lot of the churches, or religions, in the future. Like Egyptian, Greece, Rome, Babylon, later Babylon, and Catholicism. So here I made a comparison between the gods of the Sumerian Babylonian Pantheon and the gods of some of these major or great religious nations, right? These polytheistic nations that rose and fell. So here you can see the pantheon here is An, who is god of heaven. And if you compare An to the Greco-Roman pantheon, and I lump them always together because Greece and Rome, they were just extremely similar. Rome copied so much from Greece, and they basically were just like united. So I just put them together. So An, the god of heaven, the Sumerian god, was replaced in the Greco-Roman pantheon with Zeus, Jupiter, which is the god of heaven and thunder. Then you have Enki, the god of water and human civilization, and he's replaced with Poseidon and Neptune, the god of the sea. Then you have Enlil, the god of wind and storm. He's replaced with Poseidon again, and Zeus, the god of wind and storm. And then Ninursag is the goddess of the earth, the fertility, and also called mother. And then in Greece and Rome, they have goddess of the earth named Gaia and Terra Mater in Rome. Then you have Aphrodite, and Venus is the goddess of fertility, love, and beauty. So they split the two. Then you have Utu, the god of sun and justice, and Sumerian Pantheon is equated to Apollo, the god of sun, healing, and light. And Apollo is both in Greece, the Greco Pantheon, and Roman Pantheon. So they kept the name the same. Inanna is, or Astarte, or Ishtar, which is, people mostly heard the name Ishtar before, is the goddess of moon, sex, beauty, and war. And so they split again in the Greco-Roman pantheon. They split the two they split them into two, which they have Athena and Minerva as the goddess of war. And then you have Artemis and Diana as the goddess of the moon and hunting. So as you can see, Greco-Roman was very influenced by Babylonian, ancient Sumerian concepts of the deities. And they took a lot from them. And we're going to analyze this with the Egyptians too. And I basically use them because they were like the major religions at the time, or nations that influenced a lot of other polytheistic belief systems, and influenced a lot of the culture even to today. So what they were influenced by really matters then, because this just tells you that all this leads right back to Babylon. So now with the Egyptians. So now we already went through the Sumerian gods. Here they kind of have the same thing. Now it's less than the other list, but it's still kind of the same concept. So they have Ra, who is a sun god. And always pay attention to that. They always use the sun. The sun is always revered as the highest of the deities. It's always like the highest there. That god of heaven is represented by the sun. In the Sumerian Pantheon, they have the god of sun, and they have the god of heaven. So they have literally, like, the sun is always revered. And that is something that's important, because the sun and sun worship is an important part of Revelation, end time prophecy is sun worship. So they have Shu, the god of air, similar to the god of heaven as well. They have Tefnut, the god of moisture, which you could say the god of water. Basically, they got Set, the god of storm, similar to Enlil. Hathor is the original mother goddess, similar to Ninersag. And then you have Isis, the goddess of life, magic, and moon. So she's also the goddess of moon, similar to Inanna, Ishtar. But also life also would mean sex and all that extra stuff. And also notice magic. So magic was brought into this in Egyptian, because that was something that was very important in their culture, was magic. So as you can see, these deities became later the influence in the pantheon of Egypt, Greek, and Roman myths. And even Eastern myths like Hinduism, their pantheons are also very similar. They are all connected to the Sumerian Babylonian culture. Greek thought that philosophy took from Babylon and then inspired the development of the Catholicized Christianity. So this is why I go here, is because the Greeks end up influencing a lot of the later Christianity, which became Catholicism. And so now you're seeing that the root of that is actually Babylon, and not actually Greece itself, but mostly Babylon, because Greece carried on the Babylonian teachings. So this is why it's important to look into that. That's why I have this comparison here. So the Roman church comparisons to ancient Babylon. How do they compare? Right? So the comparisons between the two is very interesting. First is the belief of the immortality of the soul. Remember, again, ancient Babylon taught that the dead, the dead continue on living, and they go into a place. Depending on the place, we're going to go into that later, of what the Roman Catholics believe when it comes to the afterlife and the different places. But in Babylon, in ancient Babylon, they believed in an underworld, that one would go to an underworld, and depending on their afterlife, all depended on how they were buried and all that kind of stuff. But all of them were destined to go to the underworld. There was really no special place or special treatment at the time in the Sumerian culture. But eventually in later Babylon, belief systems, they did start to basically change it where you could go depending on how you lived in this life, you know, like if you were a ruler, someone great or someone poor, it all depended on where you would go in the afterlife. And so Roman Catholic Church continued the teaching of the immortality of souls. The Babylon brought that concept in, that the soul continues to live after, that a human continues to live after they die. And then you can find this in the concept of Egyptian mythology, and then in Greece and Rome mythology, they also taught that basically the life continues on after death. So this is the comparison between Roman and the ancient Babylon that they brought into the Christian church, and plagued the Christian church with paganistic ideas. The next thing is purgatory and immortal fire, hellfire. So continuing hellfire, the concept of hell that they teach is very similar to the paganistic ideas in Babylon, which is the underworld, the concept of the underworld, hell, and how the idea of hell being underground and stuff, that was introduced by the Roman Catholic Church. So, and that was something that was originated in Babylon, not biblical. The next thing is the continuance of the human priest and mediator, or acting as mediator. So they still continue the practice of a priest as mediator. People go and confess their sins to the priest still, instead of, you know, Jesus Christ, which is who he plays as high priest. And then they have the highest priest, which is the Pope, who is is called the mediator of God and earth, as you saw in the earlier quotes that I gave. And there's many other quotes like that are blasphemous by definition. And you can find this in one of my other Bible study lives that talked about the mark of the beast, and also analyzing the 4 beasts in Daniel, and talking about the little horn and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you can find the quotes that they talk about that in the previous lives I did. They believe that the high priest is also to be a theocratic ruler of the nation, or a theocracy. And so the Roman Catholic Church still continues that practice of a theocracy, that the church rules the nation, and the priest is head of it. And that's the same thing in the ancient Babylonian society. Their priest was the ruler. They believe in Mary, who plays as the mediatrix, and she is called Divine Mother. And this is very similar to Babylon, because Babylonian belief system, their goddess was called the Mother. The goddess of the earth was considered the mother. She was the fertility, the mother of fertility, the mother, the goddess of sex, fertility, and the earth. And these were attributed to Ninersag and Ishtar. And Ishtar became Isis, and also Aphrodite, and the Greek and Roman Pantheon. So this was always passed down, and that is why also in many of the statues of Mary that from the Catholic Church and stuff in medieval times, they actually found that they were replaced. Originally they were statues of Isis and like pagan goddesses that are goddesses of the earth and fertility and all that. They replaced those idols with Mary. So it's really like they knew what they were doing. They kind of believed that it was basically the same thing. Because why else would you replace an image that was pagan with a person you believe is the divine true mother? Why would you replace her with a pagan, have a pagan statue be replaced by that? So it's kind of interesting that they choose that exact one to be the replacement for Mary. So you can find those trends in there. They also hold ideas of Neoplatonism, which was inspired by Babylonian philosophy. So a lot of those the teachings of the astrology, beliefs in the study of the astrology of the stars and zodiac and all those things are brought in from originally Babylon, and then Neoplatonism took from a lot of ideas from that, and also from Eastern religions like Hinduism and stuff. So they took from all those. Greece did, and Plato took a lot of the ideas from those as well, and then that eventually crept into the Christian church. Next is, so here is just talking about the daughters of Babylon. Revelation 17 continues on saying that Babylon has daughters. So the daughters of this particular harlot, Roman Catholic Church, are the churches that came out of the Roman Catholic, out of the church itself, that adopted its belief systems with them. These churches are daughters that over time began to develop characteristics of the mother church. These are the Protestant churches. So a woman in Bible prophecy, it means church. So the daughters, which is again a woman or a female representative of a church, or means churches. Daughters with S, you could see as churches. They came out of the church, they carried characteristics of Rome, and the majority of them were Protestant churches. But they also influenced esoteric ideas that this church brought it with them, that led to esoteric sects that broke out of the church, like Freemasonry. So it wasn't just Protestantism that kind of came out of this, out of the rule and dominion of the Roman Catholic Church, but also a lot of esoteric belief systems and religions also brought in a lot of the ideas from the church, the Catholic Church, into their ideologies as well. So you have like Freemasonry, Theosophical Society, Illuminati, the New Age movement, modern Gnosticism. These were all kept influenced by Babylon of old, who carried these doctrines. And that is what we're going to talk about in the next part of this topic or series. Is, I don't know why it says end of part 2. This is end of part 1, but you get what I mean. But yeah, so this is what we're going to talk about in the next topic, is what Babylonian ideas started coming now into Protestantism. Not exactly Protestantism, but like in modern societies and movements that came out of this Reformation period and the French Revolution and everything, and what ideas started coming into these sects that are going to play a big part in this whole one world government, one world order, Luciferian serpent ideas, that because the main topic we're talking about is spiritualism. This is the issue. The issue is spiritualism and sun worship. Sun worship by law will be the mark of the beast. But it's also spiritualism that's going to come into this, which is why Revelation 13 talks about the beasts of the earth, the United States, will be committing miracles. They'll be acting with miracles and making fire coming down from heaven, and all these miraculous sights that are going to confuse people into submission. And a lot of that is going to involve spiritualism, and this is why I wanted to talk about this in part 2. So please join me in part 2, and I hope you guys enjoyed and learned a lot from this part 1 series of Babylon and the Bride. And I just pray that you guys have been blessed by this study and you guys learned a lot, and that you can see that there is history is repeating itself, and there is a spirit that's been brought about from the ancient times that still continues on today. Even though they have different names now, the spirit behind it is still the same. And that's what the point is to analyze and study the spirits behind things. and focus on that and what they're teaching, if they're in line with the biblical doctrine or if they're in line with a very paganistic or polytheistic doctrine. So that's what I encourage for all of you, and I hope you just enjoyed this, and please stay tuned for the part 2, because that one will be very interesting, and I encourage a lot of note taking on that and screenshotting or whatever you got to do. So thank you. God bless you guys.